On July 24, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Daspit, aboard the USS Tenosa, had the perfect target: a crippled 19,000-ton Japanese tanker, Tonin Maru No. 3, sitting dead in the water just 2,000 yards away. Daspit maneuvered into a textbook firing position and fired 11 torpedoes, one at a time from point-blank range. Every single torpedo hit exactly where he aimed. But there were no explosions, just metallic clangs echoing through the hull, like hammers striking an anvil. The tanker remained afloat, a massive, mocking dud. Daspit returned to Pearl Harbor with his last torpedo, determined to provide evidence that American submarines were fighting the war with defective weapons. His failure would finally force the U.S. Navy to confront a deadly truth: the Mark 14 torpedo was fundamentally broken. The first sign of the problem came on Christmas Eve 1941, just 17 days after Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Tyrell Jacobs of the USS Sargo fired 8 torpedoes at Japanese merchant ships, heard the metallic strikes, but saw no explosions. The ships sailed away undamaged. Jacobs filed a detailed report stating his torpedoes had hit but failed to detonate. The Bureau of Ordnance, which designed and tested the weapon, dismissed the report, blaming crew error for the next 18 months. Soon, reports of multiple failures flooded in. Lieutenant Commander Richard Voge of the USS Sailfish reported in January 1942 that his torpedoes were running at least 10 feet deeper than their set depth. Lieutenant Commander Lewis Parks of the USS Pompone and others reported the same issue. The Bureau of Ordnance insisted the torpedoes were fine, blaming improper attack geometry or depth-setting procedures. Commanders were also reporting premature explosions and duds. The man who broke this institutional denial was Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, who took command of Southwest Pacific submarines in May 1942. Nicknamed Uncle Charlie, Lockwood was a career submariner who trusted his men and refused to accept excuses for the failures. In June 1942, violating Navy protocol, he conducted unauthorized tests at Frenchman Bay, Australia. By firing torpedoes through submerged fishing nets and measuring the holes, he gathered undeniable proof. The Mark 14 was running an average of 11 feet deeper than set, sometimes up to 15 feet. The problem was a design flaw. When engineers increased the warhead weight, they failed to recalibrate the depth control pressure sensor, causing the torpedo to ride deeper. An 11-foot error meant torpedoes aimed at a ship's keel would pass harmlessly underneath. The Bureau of Ordnance dismissed Lockwood's test results, claiming improper methodology. Nevertheless, the problem was identified, and the fix was simple: recalibrate the sensor. By late 1942, the depth problem was solved. With the depth fixed, a second problem became glaringly obvious. Torpedoes were hitting targets and not exploding. The Mark 14 used the Mark 6 exploder, which had a magnetic influence trigger and a contact trigger. The magnetic trigger, intended to detonate the warhead beneath the ship's keel, was failing catastrophically. On April 9, 1943, Lieutenant Commander John Scott of the USS Tunney fired 10 torpedoes at 3 Japanese aircraft carriers. He heard 7 explosions, but all 3 carriers remained undamaged. Intelligence later confirmed the explosions were premature. The hypersensitive magnetic trigger, only tested near Rhode Island, was reacting to the Pacific's varied magnetic fields, detonating the warheads too early and only warning the enemy of the submarine's presence. Furthermore, design flaws allowed water to leak into the casing, corroding the electrical connections. Lockwood pushed to deactivate the magnetic trigger, and on June 24, 1943, Admiral Chester Nimitz authorized the use of only the contact trigger. This solved the premature detonation problem, but immediately revealed the third major defect: the contact trigger was also broken. This brings us back to Lawrence Daspit and the Tonin Maru on July 24, 1943. With the magnetic trigger deactivated, his torpedoes should have exploded on contact. They did not. The torpedo Daspit brought back to Pearl Harbor provided the proof. Tests revealed a design flaw in the contact trigger's firing pin mechanism. American submarine doctrine emphasized making perfect 90-degree perpendicular shots. But this was precisely the problem. The extreme sudden deceleration on a direct hit over 500 Gs would bend the firing pin, jamming it before it could strike the percussion cap. The better the shot, the more likely the dud.
Lockwood authorized immediate field modifications. The base torpedo shop at Pearl Harbor designed a lighter, stronger firing pin, ironically fabricated from aluminum salvaged from Japanese aircraft propellers. By November 1943, all three major defects were finally fixed. Depth control was corrected, the magnetic trigger was deactivated, and the contact trigger was redesigned. 21 months after the war started, American submarines finally had reliable weapons. Lockwood was the driving force behind these changes. He fought the Bureau of Ordnance every step of the way, conducting unauthorized tests, meticulously documenting failures, and even covering for his commanders who modified torpedoes against regulations. When Bureau officials suggested his commanders were to blame, Lockwood famously lost his temper, telling them, "If the Bureau of Ordnance can't provide us with torpedoes that will hit and explode, then for God's sake get the Bureau of Ships to design a boat hook with which we can rip the plates off a target side." Lockwood also changed the culture of the submarine force by relieving cautious commanders and promoting aggressive skippers. Men like Dudley Morton of the USS Wahoo, Richard O'Kane of the USS Tang, and Eugene Fluckey of the USS Barb proved that aggressive tactics worked. Morton made the Wahoo expendable, attacking a destroyer head-on and sinking it at close range, and then fighting a 14-hour battle on the surface against a 5-ship convoy. Samuel Dealey of the USS Harder became famous for hunting destroyers, sinking 3 in 4 days in May 1944. Fluckey's Barb even conducted the only ground combat operation by American submarine personnel in World War II, landing a demolition team to blow up a railroad. These aggressive commanders, supported by Lockwood, now had the reliable weapons and the freedom to win the war. The results were devastating. In 1942, with broken torpedoes and cautious tactics, submarines sank only 109 Japanese ships. In 1943, with the depth problem fixed and aggressive commanders promoted, they sank over 1.5 million tons. In 1944, with all torpedo defects fixed, they sank over 3 million tons. American submarines ultimately sank 1,314 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons, which accounted for 55% of all Japanese shipping losses during the war. This campaign was the single greatest cause of Japan's defeat. Japan's home islands had almost no natural resources and depended entirely on sea imports for 90% of its oil, all of its rubber, and 88% of its iron ore. The American submarine campaign cut this lifeline. Oil tankers were sunk faster than they could be replaced, crippling war production and grounding aircraft and warships, including the super battleship Yamato. Japan's economy was starved. The cost for the U.S. was high. 52 American submarines and 3,506 submariners were lost, a 22% fatality rate, the highest of any branch of the American military. They faced not only the enemy, but the knowledge that their own weapons might kill them, as in the case of the USS Tang, sunk by one of its own circling torpedoes. Meanwhile, the Japanese Imperial Navy possessed some of the world's most technically advanced submarines. Their I-400 class were massive, long-range, and carried bomber aircraft. Crucially, they had working torpedoes from day one. Yet they accomplished almost nothing of strategic value. Their failure was due to fundamentally flawed strategic choices. Japanese doctrine focused on a single, decisive fleet battle, tasking their submarines to hunt American warships, not the economically critical merchant shipping. Furthermore, as the war progressed, their combat submarines were disastrously diverted to suicide supply missions, hauling rice and ammunition to bypassed garrisons rather than fighting the enemy. They failed to develop a unified command for protecting merchant shipping until late 1943, and their anti-submarine warfare was inadequate, lacking effective destroyer escorts, sonar, and radar. Japanese naval culture prioritized the glamour of battleships and carriers over the unglamorous work of escort duty, starving the anti-submarine effort of resources and talent. The lessons are stark. Technical excellence means nothing without correct strategic employment. Japanese submarines had better technology and working torpedoes, but they attacked the wrong targets. American submarines had broken torpedoes, but once fixed, they had the right strategy, aggressive commanders, and relentless determination to strangle Japan's economy. Lockwood's fight against the bureaucratic stonewalling of the Bureau of Ordnance proved that sometimes the greatest victories come from solving problems nobody wants to admit exist. The American submariners' determination and success shortened the war and saved countless lives.